Thank you again for the warm welcome, and conscious that I've got the afternoon slot between lunch and the Christmas party, so I'll try and keep it relatively brief and to the point. My name's Adam Manhi. I'm Head of Strategic Partnerships for Flatiron in the UK, so I lead our, as Torben alluded to, our health ecosystem strategy, but also our strategy and partnerships with NHS trusts. I want to spend the next sort of 15 minutes or so talking through what is the problem that we're trying to solve at Flatiron, how are we going about solving it, what's been the impact of our data, and what's next for us, what's our vision, and with a particular focus on the UK. But I'll start by just talking about our mission. Our mission is to improve the lives by learning from the experience of every person with cancer. But what does that actually mean? So as you'll know, if you've had any health condition, you may know someone who's had cancer. The moment a cancer patient is diagnosed, a lot of information is being generated on that cancer patient's journey. Some of that information is structured, it's tests, it's treatments, patients go into remission, patients, sadly, cancer recurs. And so how do we turn that information into high quality real-world data that can drive research and improvements in cancer care? Flatiron is a company, you may or may not know, was founded in 2012 in the US. And we have an extensive network of partners in the US with community oncology practices, where 80% of our data originates, and 20% of our data originates through academic medical center partnerships in the US, so teaching hospital equivalent partnerships. In order to be able to create these data sets, we have a highly cross-functional team. So both in the US, in the UK, Japan, and Germany, our 4 markets, we have clinicians, epidemiologists, data scientists, software engineers, and many, many more. And that's how we're able to generate the value from real-world data that we see, and we see the impact of every day. The one other thing I'd mention is we're an independent subsidiary of Roche. So whilst that gives us deep pockets to invest in our skill building and building of our business, it does still allow us to work with all partners of the cancer research ecosystem. So we work with all pharma companies who have a portfolio in oncology, research institutions, and academics. And that's one important point to note. So I won't spend too much time on this. I think it won't surprise any of you in the room that cancer care at the moment in the UK is under a lot of strain. So we see 375,000 patients diagnosed every year, and this number is increasing, quite closely aligned to the aging population. And performance against cancer waiting times, outcomes are struggling. And so unfortunately that is at the detriment to us all. And while there's a lot of opportunity through operational improvements, investment, improving or relieving capacity constraints, trials and investments in research is one other way to improve the treatments that patients can receive. Trials have always been the evidence generation engine for research and innovation in healthcare. And they're a fantastic way about getting a very high quality data set on a controlled population, and typically a population which is selective and isn't representative of the real world. So one of the things that we see at Flatiron is while trials will always be the mainstay of treatment, we need to invest more in real world data because there are always challenges in how you extrapolate learnings from trials into the real world. And so without that investment and that focus, opportunities are being missed to improve cancer research and care and ultimately outcomes. Having said that, it doesn't go without saying that actually accessing this information, and I think I've been here an hour and I've already heard multiple talk around how challenging this process is. But if you get diagnosed with cancer, you start in a hospital, you'll have your initial tests, you may get referred for radiotherapy or surgery. And that means that the information on your journey is highly siloed and fragmented. So it never sits within one system, and even if it sits within one hospital system, that hospital has a different EHR to another hospital. So it's incredibly fragmented and hard to analyze at scale. The other point to mention is a large bulk of, particularly in cancer care, of that information is unstructured. And so it sits within the free text of clinical letters, radiology reports, and pathology reports. And whilst hospitals and health systems have made a real effort to address this and curate this information so we can actually use it for research, that isn't the core part of a hospital's responsibility. And doctors and IT teams are already maxed out just looking after the existing technology portfolio or managing existing patients, that this is a real gap that we see at hospitals. But before I go into how we as an organization are looking to address this, I just want to talk a bit about what do we think is real-world data. So we define real-world data as any data that relates to patient health that's captured on the routine care of that patient. And that can be electronic healthcare records. Most hospitals in the UK have EHRs now, right through to hospital and coding activity, so the diagnosis codes, or in the US, obviously, information that relates to financial flows. Disease registries, UK Biobank is one major registry, as an example of a registry in the UK. And wearables. I'm probably not the only one wearing an Apple Watch in this room. That's capturing information. It's a form of real-world data. But what we do at Flatiron is we know that cancer care starts in the hospital, and that's where the majority of cancer care in the UK happens. And so within the EHR, there's two formats of data that are captured. There's structured data and unstructured data. The types of information that we typically is structured: diagnosis codes, demographic information, the tests, the treatments that patients receive. From an unstructured data perspective, as I've already mentioned, clinical letters, radiology reports, pathology reports, and so on. But actually, when you look at the structured data, it's incredibly messy. And I think I've already heard this again, it won't come as a surprise to you folks in the room. But when you take, for example, treatments, a treatment could be written in the EHR as the drug name, the brand name, an abbreviation. It could be misspelled. And so it becomes incredibly hard to use that for research. So what we do is we turn that into one consistent terminology that can be used for research. But really where Flatiron's special sauce is in the unstructured data processing. So it's turning what is free text, obviously recognizing the privacy challenges that exist, into high-quality real-world data. And this is a combination of machine learning and human abstraction. So we use machine learning to identify the relevant documents to interpret stage or biomarker status. And we use trained oncology nurses who go into those reports and pull out the stage of a cancer or the presence of a biomarker. And we have policies and procedures built around every single variable in our data set to guide abstractors so that that interpretation is consistent across our organization. We also have a number of quality controls and checks in place to ensure that that data is of the highest standard possible. So this output of this is a high-quality real-world data set, and essentially real-world evidence that can inform treatment decisions and inform drug discovery and development. Our data has been used, and our partners have published on our data in a number of different high-profile or high-impact journals: the Journal of Clinical Oncology, Lancet, The Oncologist, and so on. And they cover a range of different topics, ranging from understanding disease biology through to unlocking or identifying access to care issues, through to method validation. And in particular, I want to highlight two studies to you today. The first is the one that's listed on the slide at 2019 ASCO plenary session, in which our data was part of an assessment to look at, with our partners at Yale, to look at how racial disparities were driving inequality in time to cancer treatment. So a massively important topic, and one that has informed subsequent policy decisions and actions. The second is a method validation study. So we believe that there's an increasing role for machine learning and AI in data processing. However, we're yet to see how effective this can be at scale to the level of quality that we see to inform regulatory decisions or HTA decisions. So one of the things that this study looks at is looking at what variables within a patient record do we think lend themselves most likely to be derived from a machine learning approach. So can you trust an ML algorithm to identify a specific variable within a record and interpret that at scale and at high quality? So these are two studies that we use Flatiron data to transform research and care in cancer. But that's all well and good. It's great that we have these studies that show how data can improve the quality of research and care. But what does it actually mean for patients? That's what we're all here to try and improve patient care. And again, two examples that are really important for us. And the first is palbociclib, which is a hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative therapy in breast cancer. And that was the initial indication. The company Pfizer wanted to expand that indication into men with breast cancer, a very rare population, a very hard population to design a trial for. Where do you put your trial sites? How do you run fast enough trial feasibility? How do you set them up in a way that's cost effective? And so what Pfizer did was used our real-world data set of over 2 million cancer patients in the US to identify those patients with men with breast cancer who were receiving this therapy off-label, to demonstrate that the safety, effectiveness, and tolerability of those treatments was comparable to women with breast cancer. And this supported an FDA label expansion into men with breast cancer. So a real strong testament to the use of real-world data in research, in drug discovery, in drug development, but also the Flatiron model. And the second is cetuximab. Cetuximab is a treatment for bowel cancer and head and neck cancer. It's an infused therapy. An infusion can take 2 to 3 hours, notwithstanding travel time to and from the clinic to have your infusion. The initial label indicated that this drug should be given on a weekly dosing schedule. So every week, for half a day a week, patients would have to come into the clinic and hospital or physician office, receive this therapy. Using Flatiron data, Lilly, the manufacturers, were able to demonstrate that with no impact on outcomes, they could shift from a weekly dosing schedule to a bi-weekly dosing schedule. So now patients only have to appear in the clinic every 2 weeks, which is a massive improvement on their quality of life. So just 2 examples of how we see the benefit of real-world data and what drives us every day to improve the quality of and care patients with cancer. So I've talked a lot about our US business model. Yes, we started in the US, and we've been in the UK for a few years now. And our ambition in the UK is very similar. While the learnings that we have developed in the US can be applied to UK cancer patients, nothing will deliver more value for UK cancer patients than having high-quality, real-world clinical data sets for cancer patients in the UK driving research. So we've established a model which has full NHS Health Research Authority approval to partner with NHS hospitals to access that raw cancer information across the cancer patient journey. And we curate that information, as I described, the structured and unstructured data processing into high-quality, research-ready data sets that we return to each hospital partner on a regular cadence. And this data set reflects new patients coming in as they receive new treatments and tests, or existing patients. So there is a slight latency, but it gives hospitals the ability to track their patients over time. We then combine that information with the anonymized data sets from other partners in the Flatiron network. And this is where there is increased value in the fact that each partner can start to benchmark themselves against what would be considered high quality or leading best practice around time to treatment or outcomes as part of being a member of the Flatiron network. From a research perspective, we're working with all industry researchers in oncology and academic partners. And this is where our amazing partnership with Lifebit comes in, that developing a trusted research environment with Lifebit, our partners will be able to access our data sets through this environment and subject to a research oversight process as well. So every research request that we receive has to go through this process, and it's a twofold process. One, it's an internal feasibility check. Can the research question that the researcher has posed be answered using Flatiron data? And 2, does it meet the bar for patient and public interest? So every request will be reviewed by a panel of external representatives, clinicians, patients, and lay representatives in the UK, who will validate that that is in the public and patient interest, and the data will be provided, access to the data will be provided for those researchers. That will generate the revenue that enables us to sustain as a business, and then we share that value back with our hospital partners. So each hospital partner will get access to their own information, and they're able to invest in cancer services and care and research. We launched a partnership with Leeds earlier this year, and this was our first partnership in the UK with that model that I just described. It's a 10 years all cancers partnership. We have access to a broad array of clinical data, the clinical data required to build the data sets that we need to. We have access to 50,000 historic patients and 5,000 new cancer patients every year. And I've talked a bit about the revenue sharing agreement that's in place for them to invest in their own cancer services and relieve some of the tension that exists. The other point I would say is this is based on an opt-out model, so the data is far more representative than models where you are consenting patients, because that suffers from the similar challenges that you face with trials. And we've established our own opt-out model for this partnership, so every patient receives a letter and is given a chance to opt out should they wish to. And I think around 20,000 letters have gone out to patients, and we're under 5% opt-out rate, which is a great testament to all the PPIE work that we've done to date. Just to touch on this, because I know we're almost at time, I've talked a bit about the financial benefits. From a research perspective, access to this data for our partners can enable better feasibility, faster trial matching. Sites can use it to stratify their patient populations, to direct resources in the right space, and also support operational expectations, operational responsibilities as it relates to COSD submissions, to the registry submissions, and dashboards to improve management of their services. But in summary, there's really 3 points that are critical for us in the UK. The first is we need to scale our network. So beyond Leeds, we've signed an additional partnership which we'll go public on early next year. And that's just part of building a network of representative centres to really transform research and care in the UK. But another pillar of that is we need to build trust, and we want to build trust in the market. We have a collaboration with NICE about how real-world data can improve the HTA process, and we've worked with DataCan and HDI UK as well around methods and analysis of real-world data. So it's both investing in the cancer ecosystem, but also the data ecosystem as well. The final point is PPIE, or patient and public involvement, is a critical part of our business right from the very beginning, and that's been an area we've invested in heavily. And so we continue to do this through our own patient panel, patient engagement activities with partners, but also through this oversight panel, and making sure that patients see the value in sharing their data, and that we close the loop to tell them that their data has informed HTA submissions or regulatory filings and so on. And that's a critical part of our strategy. So just to end on, again, thank you for your time today. If you're a researcher or an industry representative interested in UK real-world data, particularly in cancer, we'd love to have a conversation and love to work with you all. Thank you.
That's wonderful, and that is another round of questions for you, I hope. Again, for the online audience, please do submit them as well. And I'm looking around the room first. Are there any questions for Adam? It has gotten warmer because you put heaters in, so in the morning people were cold. By the way,
I'm feeling great,
actually. It's the opposite. No, I'm kidding. Over there, please.
Adam, thanks. For the breast cancer case, did you actually have to do any trials at all, or was it just all on the real-world data that you collected?
Yes, a good question. So Pfizer, actually, as far as I'm aware, were trying to run a small set of trials, but I think given the challenges, they also supplemented with Flatiron real-world data. So it wasn't a Flatiron only real-world data product, but it certainly, obviously, that's helped provide the evidence they needed for that indication expansion.
Brilliant, thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions? Over there.
Hi Adam, it was great to hear you talk about patient and public involvement. Could you give us a couple of examples of things that you're doing to engage with patients?
Yeah, so prior to signing the Leeds partnership, we ran a range of different workshops and with different patient groups, so representative of the community. We ran surveys and took the feedback on board, and that actually informed some of the design of the local opt-out process. So that's one part. Every subsequent partnership that we sign, we want to make sure that patients who are being treated by that hospital are supportive of the partnership. So for the next partnership that we signed, we've run, again, a similar extensive campaign to consult with a vast range of patient perspectives and public perspectives. So that's kind of what we do on a partnerships front, but we have our own patient panel who work with us. They input into how we speak to the public, how we would define a fair value exchange between a hospital and Flatiron, and then we have our own public panel that's reviewing every access request to make sure it's in the public and patient interest. So it really kind of filters throughout our organisation.
And there's a question over there.
Hi. Thanks, really inspiring talk, thank you. I wonder, you told us two examples that went through, and one was then basically limiting the treatments that patients need to have, if I got that right?
Yes, improve the dosing schedule from 1 week to 2 weeks.
And then I thought, like, okay, who's paying for something like that? Because that halves also the sales of the company, right? I mean, that's probably a bit mathematical, but there's no profit, right, coming out of that. So how does that work? Because it's fascinating that it worked out anyway.
You mean for Lilly, the manufacturer?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know the ins and outs of the arrangement, but I think, in a world where quality of life is an important metric for payers to define the formulary, I think that's an important criteria. If another comparable therapy is also being given once every 2 weeks, you could argue that that is the standard of care that should be adopted by the manufacturer, and actually having a weekly dosing schedule, where it may have higher commercial returns in the short term, may in the longer term not be as beneficial as it would suffer against another comparator. But I don't know the ins and outs of the commercial arrangement, but that would be my immediate response.
We have a question from online. People are always interested in the use cases. So what are other cases where the data was helpful for your clients? So
Yeah, absolutely. So our data is quite often used in HTA submissions. So there's a very recent example that Takeda used US data, combined it with a German chart review, actually, because we didn't have, at this point, our data sets in Germany ready. But that was as part of a filing to NICE, and we have, obviously, I've mentioned the partnership with NICE. So HTA submissions is one hot area where we see our data being used, particularly in Europe, but also in right through the R&D processes. It informs how certain companies or certain assets are prioritized in the development process.
Amazing. Any more questions in the room? I believe we have one more or two more online. Given the risk of patient re-identification, including of linked data, can you comment on strategies and novel technologies for de-identification?
That's not an area of my expertise, but from a privacy perspective, we've defined a model that underpins this, which essentially where we're actually removing identifiers as part of that process, both in the structured and unstructured data. And then as we're processing that data, each partner signs off on that data being released into our environment. And as part of that is we developed our own anonymization approach, and that's with input from partners to ensure that the data that is accessible to us or accessible to us in our environment is anonymized. And then obviously from there, before it reaches the final step, which is the trusted research environment, which is accessible to researchers, further privacy enhancing techniques are employed. And there is a number of both legal and technical controls in the TRE, or the trusted research environment, that restrict patients or restrict researchers in any way being able to link those to specific patients.
Perfect. And on that, it's a perfect time for that last question that we have here from online. Is it when within that environment, is there any limit to the type of analysis that can be carried out, and I guess subject to appropriate consent? Yeah, I guess that's a question for the Lifebit folks working on the theory. No, I mean, the intention is that we want to take the use cases that pharma use our data for and ensure that the relevant tooling and applications exist within the environment to be able to do the types of analysis. I think while it's critical that we have this from a privacy perspective, we need to make sure that it's not at the detriment of innovation, and so that it has to have the relevant tooling to be able to support a vast array of use cases that I've talked about today. Perfect. And, there's one more question over there. Yes, go on. I think we have time for just one more.
Hiya.
Hi.
So you mentioned about the like patient feedback. Have you got anything like as an example of what they're mainly saying about that? What sort of outcomes they've got that they've been happy with?
Yeah, so I think one particular topic that patients fed back on was whether we consented patients versus relying on the opt-out. So there is a legal basis in the UK for where the NHS has a national opt-out, and so for research use cases, patients can opt out of their data being used for that purpose. One of the reasons we didn't go down the consent path, or two of the reasons we didn't go down the consent path, was first, it's incredibly challenging to consent patients at the scale that we need to, both for the hospital and us, to be able to do that in a way that you have 30-minute conversations with each patient. It's just not feasible for clinical care teams to do that. And also, consent suffers from the similar challenges, bias challenges that trials does. Trials has a typical socioeconomic profile, an ethnicity profile, and the benefits of real-world data is that's removed. You're accessing all patient information across a vast array of patients. So being able to rely on an opt-out model means that we get access to a more representative sample, more representative population of patients in the UK than we would if we consented. And so that was we tested that with patients. And when given that information, over 90% actually approved the use of the opt-out model, and we worked with patients to design the letter and the information handout that would enable them to make that decision.
Perfect, and I think now we need to keep the people caffeinated.
Sure, that sounds good.
But thank you so much, that's fantastic to have you here.
Thank you very much, thank you.